Star Trek The Next Generation was 7 seasons jam-packed full of episodes, 178 in total. But what were those episodes that didn't make it past the drawing board about? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information on any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're continuing our look at some of the abandoned episode ideas for Star Trek The Next Generation, to better understand their place in Star Trek history. During Season 6's production of TNG, the writer's room was filled with story ideas to really change up the show's dynamic. And Jerry Taylor, future Voyager showrunner, would pitch 2 story ideas which would do just that, and give us a first look at the mysterious species known as the Breen. The first story would see the Enterprise D being recalled from deep space exploration to permanently guard the Sol system from any threats that might appear. Starfleet, finally getting its head out of the sand after Wolf 359, realizes that the capital of the Federation should have a stationary defense force in case the Borg come a-knocking once again. Their plan is to update the Enterprise D with newly developed technologies and have it patrol Sector 001 at all times. Starfleet also believes the Enterprise D is just too valuable to lose. Meanwhile, the crew of the Enterprise all react differently to the news and don't know what they're going to do with their lives. Captain Picard is especially torn, as he's being pressured to remain captain of the Enterprise, even though all he wants to do is be out in deep space exploring. While all this is happening, the mysterious Breen finally make contact with the Federation. Their flagship arrives at Earth to begin negotiations with the Federation, and it is decided that a joint scientific mission should be conducted to smooth over relations between these 2 galactic powers. Of course, the Enterprise D and the Breen flagship are assigned the task, but the mission goes awry when a spatial anomaly pops up that has disastrous effects on Federation warp cores, causing Picard to separate the starship in an attempt to save his crew before the warp core explodes. Like Star Trek Generations, the Enterprise's saucer section would end up crashing into an alien planet, ending the first part of this 2-parter, leaving the audience to wonder if the crew survived and what the future will hold for starships named Enterprise. The second story was a little different, as instead of Captain Picard, this 2-parter would have focused on Commander Riker instead. In this story, Commander William T. Riker finally accepts a promotion to the rank of captain, and is given command of the Federation starship Indiana, with some of its senior officers' positions filled by senior officers from the Enterprise D. The Indiana's first mission is to explore the Gamma Quadrant, and so they set a course for the Bajoran wormhole. But while en route to Deep Space Nine, the ship is hailed by a Breen delegation, and consequently the Indiana is reassigned by Starfleet to establish diplomatic relations with the Breen. After a Breen science vessel becomes trapped in an anomaly, the Indiana is about to attempt a rescue of the trapped craft, when Riker and his ship are intercepted by none other than Riker's old captain, Jean-Luc Picard, who is apparently out for a stroll in a shuttlecraft from the Enterprise. The anomaly, of course, begins to play havoc with the shuttle systems, and Riker is forced to emergency transport his old mentor aboard. In the rescue process, however, the Indiana itself begins to be violently pulled into the anomaly, and after managing to rescue Picard, the anomaly strikes out at the Indiana, causing a rupture in the transporter room aboard the ship, and Picard gets blown out the rupture, presumably into space, and to his death. Certainly, both of these ideas would have given the show new possibilities and new directions, but both stories would be shelved by Paramount because they had other plans for the Enterprise D and the TNG crew, mainly future feature films. The Changing Seasons was to have been another time travel story for Star Trek, this time dealing with the death of William T. Riker and the bond between a father and son, namely Riker's dad, that we had all met back in Season 2 of the show. Though the two men had had a tense relationship during Riker's life, it's only after his death that the audience discovers the true bond that they actually had, when Riker's father risks everything to go back in time and save his son. David Livingston would be the man that convinced Rick Berman not to produce this story. In Livingston's eyes, the story was a bad copy of yesterday's Enterprise, and highly doubted any of the production staff would want to work on a bad story surrounding Riker's death. And ultimately, Berman would agree. With the successful inclusion of Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and James Doohan to the Star Trek The Next Generation family, the writers of the show began to look into other options of other TOS characters to make their debut in the 24th century. One of the characters they really wanted to do a story about was Pavel Chekhov. And so, story editor Naren Shankar began to develop one. Being given the directive that Chekhov's return could not be a time travel accident, or involve Walter Koenig, the actor who played Chekhov, playing a descendant of the great Russian navigator, it was a very difficult task to bring Chekhov onto the show. The Shankar story would have opened before the events of Encounter at Farpoint, where Chekhov would have been released from a planet where he had been imprisoned for many years as a prisoner of war. Flash forward, Picard and the crew of the Enterprise D are hosting a delegation for final peace talks between this planet and the Federation. Re-enter the now Ambassador Chekhov, who is leading the diplomatic team for the Federation. The story was to be a Worf and Chekhov story, the two very different men bonding over both being Russian, and Worf seeing Chekhov as a hero of the past. Throughout the negotiations with the planet, it begins to appear that Chekhov is sabotaging them, and in the end it turns out that the mental damage done to Chekhov during his imprisonment was far greater than Starfleet Medical had ever thought, and that Chekhov's entire plan, including joining the diplomatic corps and beginning negotiations with the planet, was all a ruse so he could commandeer the Enterprise and lay waste to the planet with the Enterprise's weaponry and get his revenge for what was done to him. And of course, it would be Worf who would eventually be able to reach the Chekhov we once knew, and Ambassador Chekhov would stand down and be arrested for his crimes. The problem with this story was timing. By the time the idea was presented to the TNG powers that be during Season 7 of the show, all the episodes for that season had been spoken for. And even though it was a Worf Chekhov story, meaning that later on it could have been done for Deep Space Nine, the idea would never be revisited again. Considered for the 5th season of the show, Data's family would have been pretty much just about that, Data's family. While on an unimportant mission, the Enterprise D would be infiltrated by Data's evil brother Lore, who would in turn steal the body of Data's deceased daughter Lal, and attempt to revive her using the emotion chip Lore had stole back in the episode Brothers. Though an interesting and engaging tale, the producers of the show felt that at the time, another Data Lore story was unnecessary, and thus rejected the entire idea. The Empath, a story submitted by Lisa Klink, would see the Enterprise needing the help of an alien race to traverse a dangerous part of space. The problem, however, is that the alien species in question could only communicate telepathically. This meant that the Universal Translator was no help at all. Now, you might think that this would have been a Troi story, but you'd be wrong. Troi being only half Betazoid is no help either in the matter, leaving only one person who can communicate with the aliens, that being Geordi LaForge. As it turns out, Geordi's visual implants allow the engineer to communicate with them. But when he starts, LaForge is quickly overwhelmed by how emotionally intense the alien beings are. So finally, with Troy becoming useful, she would help guide Geordi in the ways of the telepath, and eventually he would be successful in gaining the knowledge the crew needs to get out of harm's way. The entire story was designed to have LaForge step out of his comfort zone, while also explaining his love of engineering and why his best friend was an android. This was Klink's first ever submitted script to Star Trek. Ultimately, the story was rejected, but Paramount, being impressed with Klink's writing ability, invited her to pitch stories for Deep Space Nine, starting her career in Star Trek. I believe that all these stories actually had a lot of potential, unlike some of the other stories I've rattled off in this series of videos. These stories were pretty much all exciting and filled with the intellectual adventure that Star Trek is known for. Of course, not every story idea, even the great ones, can get developed and produced. But for me, it's always fascinating to look back and see what might have been, or in fact could be somewhere out there in a parallel universe. And certainly for me, these episode ideas have fought and earned their place in Star Trek history. Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrek. What do you think of these abandoned episode ideas? Which ones would you have loved to have seen? Would you like me to create more videos about these lost tales? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel continue to bring these little gems to life? Then consider becoming a channel patron. A link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.